Hello, Russell here for the Hampton History Museum, and today we're going to be talking about Powhatan warfare and tactics. So in other videos we've covered hand-to-hand weapons, the use of the longbow, and now we're going to be talking about the tactics. And so the Powhatan people that we're talking about is the chiefdom in the 1600s that covers the eastern third of Virginia. It's going to be roughly the Richmond area, headed all the way to the ocean, up almost to DC, and then down into North Carolina. And since we've covered tomahawks and monahawks and all of that, and the longbow and the arrows, we're going to talk about how they would actually be used in combat or in the field. And so the Powhatan chiefdom is a group of about 32 different tribes, 14 to 30,000 people depending on who you ask. And they're all Algonquin people, so that means their language and origins and culture are similar along this line. And so before the forming of the chiefdom, there is certainly warfare between the tribes. After the chiefdom is formed, primarily warfare is with those outside of the cultural group. So the Monacan and other Siouan speakers who would live further west inland, other tribes up in the region around DC and up into Maryland and all of that, and then occasionally warfare with other Virginia groups that might have included the Nottoway, who were of a different language stock. And so the basics for Powhatan warfare are not terribly different from southeastern native warfare in the late woodland period in general, which means you're going to have the bow and arrow as the main weapon. You're going to have a lot of arrows like so, tomahawks and monahawks and shields and knives, as we mentioned. And most of the warfare is not what we think of warfare being like in Europe at the time and just before this. You will not commonly see armies from different tribes standing across a field mowing each other down in line order or formation. That is pretty much the opposite of what you're going to see. You're going to see a lot of raids and stealth and ambush used in attacking your enemy's towns, hunting camps, parties of people, that kind of thing. You will see some line order and formation. The English colonists mentioned here in Virginia having a battle of this type portrayed for them, almost as like a play, where there was a rectangular formation of warriors facing a half-moon formation, and that they did fight in ranks in order. Although this occurs, it's pretty uncommon. The population density in the eastern woodlands is not what it is in Europe. You don't have millions of people in small nations. You don't have quite the bodies to expend that way, and these men who were fighting in these battles are hunting and fishing and providing for their families as well. They're not simply soldiers, so they hold a lot of value in their particular town or society. So they're not going to be used quite so carelessly by a chief or a king or someone like that, like you might think of being done in Europe. So primarily it's raids and ambushes. You're going to see there's a lot that goes into that. So starting at a young age, they'll be training the boys how to use a bow, tomahawks, knives, and other weapons, but also in the art of tracking, so being able to pick up an enemy's footprints or sign in the forest. You're going to see them certainly trained in using stealth, so their moccasins and years of practice to move very quietly through the forest. And in many places in the southeast, men on war parties might travel for days to reach enemy territory, observing certain taboos and rituals, which sometimes we're not so lucky to know about nowadays, and communicating very hushed or even using entirely animal calls and sign language to have complete stealth, dead silence in the forest as they move. So they're going to get close enough to an enemy town, hunting or fishing camp, or a group of travelers in the forest, and generally they're going to attack without any type of warning. You may see war cries sort of accompanying this, loud shrieks and yells, which would take a wide variety depending on where you are. And their first weapon in use is going to be this longbow. They're probably going to pick out a handful of targets, and as soon as the attack begins, a couple of the targets can be struck with arrows very quickly by several men from concealment from behind nice trees like this. And as the battle sort of breaks out, you'll see arrows coming and going between the opposing sides. The goal for many of the Powhatan men is not so much to kill an enemy with an arrow. Certainly that gains you some honor, but to get in close enough to use hand-to-hand weapons, your tomahawks and knives and swords. So they'll get in close enough, moving tree to tree, picking their way towards the enemy, and then draw hand-to-hand weapons and fight in close. So drawing something like this quickly from the belt, striking across, straight down, some of them with points and blades so they can be swung in other directions or even brought back. So these are going to be very quick, very lethal, effective weapons that can be drawn quickly from the belt at a run, and then with one swift strike can certainly kill an enemy, to be honest, armored or unarmored, depending. So, the basic of how they're going to attack. This battle may last for a couple of minutes. Generally, you're not talking about hours by any measure. And once the attacking party has spent a fair number of arrows, either succeeded in entirely eliminating their enemy or target, or at least causing them to scatter, they will generally take trophies from those that have been killed, take captives and things of value, and return quickly to where they came from. They may leave calling cards or signs and trees to make sure that you know who it was, almost as a taunt and a sort of claiming credit for the attack. That's going to be the basic setup of many of their raids and attacks against enemy tribes, and this creates sort of a cycle of revenge that you will see driving warfare for generations in this area. And so, after these raids happen and they return raids, you'll see long-standing wars which may have started over the basis of cultural differences, competing for hunting and farming territory or trade rights. They may devolve into simple cycles of revenge, the men intending to gain honor. In fact, they're rising in Powhatan society based on their merits as a hunter and a fisherman, but especially as a warrior, earning their rank of chronico, or what the English call a captain, which makes them counselor to the chief and allows them to lead war parties. So the basic setup that you're going to see is that in any tribe within the chiefdom, for the most part, a man of some note, some rank, who is a captain, can gather warriors for a raid or a fight with an enemy. Most of the time it's willing. If a chief or someone is involved, they may press warriors into service, and their honor requires that they answer this call. You'll see these campaigns going back and forth. Generally in the wintertime they die out. It's only in the warmer months of the year that you'll see a lot of this warfare going on. It is that stealth and attack and that retaliation. If you are captured, which generally for women and children is the norm. Most southeastern warfare, women and children are not involved in any way that's violent. Killing women and children for many southeastern natives is cowardice and is not practiced until the Europeans bring it here. Doesn't mean it doesn't exist, but it's not common. But if you're a Powhatan warrior or a southeastern warrior captured, oftentimes you're taken back to your enemy's town, tied to a post, and publicly tortured in front of everyone until you are dead. Many of the men throughout the southeast, which would include certainly the Powhatan chieftain, may be taught death songs to sing to their enemies in this town about how pitiful and miserable and weak they are until they are dead. Expected not to show any signs of pain or cry out, otherwise would be to die a cowardly or a bad death. This is a very different idea from in Europe, where oftentimes captives may be tortured, but primarily they're bartered back for things of value and interest. So you have the chief, who can certainly initiate warfare and raids and all the way up to Chief Powhatan. You have chronicos and captains who also have some say in this, and in the rest of the men below that are warriors of some stature who are simply participants who can gain honor, wealth, and respect through these engagements. The Powhatan, before the English arrive, have encountered the French and small trading parties, which appear to have gone peacefully from the little we know about it. They have eliminated a Spanish mission in the Yorktown area in the late 1500s. And so when the English arrive, the Powhatan are not entirely unaware of Europeans, but it's not who they're normally fighting. You'll see their ambush and raid tactics certainly used against the English with a great degree of success here and there. And you'll see commonly both sides alternating their tactics to try and gain an edge on their opponent. But the long and short of it is that after those three wars, which we may get into later, the Powhatan score great victories against the English, but it is a numbers game in a lot of ways that they cannot compete with. The population of England versus the population of the Powhatan chiefdom. The population of England dwarfs the Powhatan chiefdom. So even if the Powhatan people kill or drive out hundreds of colonists, the king can simply send more and more after it becomes a royal colony. So it's the basics of sort of pre-contact and contact tactics used by the Powhatan and other southeastern tribes.